You're listening to That's Pretty Dark,
the podcast where we talk about all of the entertainment that scared us as children
and still haunts us as adults. So grab your flashlight and join us as we take a frightfully nostalgic look over our shoulders.
And under our beds.
And in our closets.
And together we'll realize, whoa, that's pretty dark.
Pretty dark.
You ready for me to launch into my other issue today? Listener, hello, hi, welcome to That's Pretty Dark.
Welcome. We're talking about road trips.
Road trips and travel.
Because it's almost summertime, and also we're about to take one.
A little mini one.
A day trip, not a road trip.
But my name's Kaylin.
And I'm Christian.
And I am currently, right now as we speak, seeing the Eras Tour in Nashville. With Taylor Swift and Phoebe Bridgers, two of my favorite human beings on this planet Earth. If you disagree with me, that's fine. I'm not going to yell at you about it or anything, so don't let that put you off. But
I don't think they disagree that they're your favorite people.
Sure, exactly. So if you relate or understand this FOMO that I'm having in any way, please reach out. We can console each other. I technically had a ticket. My cousin invited me. I actually did. Granted, I did see it last weekend in Atlanta. I can't complain too much, but I was like in the nosebleeds and whatever.
Yeah.
And my cousin who lives in Nashville, shout out Amber. She listens. Hey, Amber.
Hi, Amber.
She invited me and I couldn't make it. And I also convinced myself I would be having all of these health problems. Like you guys know, I have all these chronic illness issues. And I was like, yeah, traveling 2 weekends in a row, it's just probably not going to work out for me. And then lo and behold, I feel great. I feel fine. All the work stuff that I was worried about got moved around and the world opened up in front of me and I could have made it, but I had already told her to give the ticket to someone else. So they will be having a glorious evening and I will be finding whatever live stream bootleg.
Just somebody with their phone just streaming.
We will all be collectively sobbing into our phones as we watch the live streams from here on out.
I will excuse myself from that. Sob fest. I'll be enjoying my night because I'm honestly having a great day. It's a great day.
Yeah, you said that, which I'm so glad to hear it.
This is a wonderful day.
You're in such a good mood. It's helping both of us.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm helping you very much, but I'm helping
I'd rather
myself.
Can you imagine if I was in this position and you weren't in a good mood?
Yeah, I'm trying to be the change that I want to see on our recording days.
I'm so proud of you.
Whatever. But yeah, you're listening to That's Pretty Dark.
This is episode 50.
Oh my God, this is episode 50. I forgot completely about episode 50.
Darklings, you have been here with us for 50 episodes.
Wow.
And I just can't believe it, honestly. It's surreal. And I know that a lot of people have been going on for a lot longer, but when we dreamed up this little podcast when it was just a twinkle in our eye a couple years ago, it's really cool to be at a point where we have 50 episodes out there.
Just a dark spot in the back of the brain.
Yeah.
Had it examined for
less a twinkle, more of a black hole.
Yeah, it was like, is this a tumor? What is this? We need to give you a what do they do? What do they give you for a brain scan? Yeah, brain scan.
Yeah, MRI.
An MRI. Let's figure out what this dark spot is in the back of your mind. And it turns out That's a pretty dark podcast.
Yeah.
So
and here we are.
Wonderful.
50 episodes later.
50 episodes. Thank you for 50 episodes and for listening all the while. And to say thank you, we're going to cap off our hangout with David Steven Cohen and Jody Gray.
That's right.
Part 2.
Yeah, part 2.
If you didn't hear part 1, go back and listen to it. It was a really good time.
What we're doing here is really trying to get to the bottom and the core of what made all of the entertainment so, for lack of a better word, dark in our childhood.
Emotionally complex shit.
We
made it so emotionally complex.
And this is the first time that we're really able to, get those opinions from people that were there in the middle of it, creating that, media at that time.
That's right.
Especially in this part of our conversation, we really get to dive into some of those questions. We learn a little bit more about how horror as a genre played in their lives and how that may have trickled into what they created. Their opinions on children's media at the time, and also some fan theories like we talked about in our intro episodes. We kind of hear from the horse's mouth. Not that either of you are horses, David and Jody are lovely, wonderful people, but we get to hear from, the actual sources of the darkness.
Sources, not horses.
Sources, not horses. It's just such a cool opportunity. And we never would have gotten this opportunity if it weren't for all of you, listening and being interested in it and wanting to explore those dark corners of your brains as well. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Well, without any further ado,
enjoy part 2.
That rhymed. I like that.
going back to the idea of like super simple versus super complex, in one of the Courage episodes that we did, we spoke about some fan theories that like at the end of one of our introduction episodes. And sometimes people can take it and stretch it real far. And then other times they're, so simple that just the tiniest seed of an idea that kind of it puts in our head. We're like, oh, well, that actually could be true. That could work. So to that end, were there ever any moments when you guys were kind of world building behind the scenes, like in the writer's room, or were you ever trying to ask those questions and explain the universe further, whether it became like serious canon or maybe it just became, inside jokes for you guys?
I'll tell you, the fan theories are fascinating. And a lot of that is connecting dots after the fact, after the numbers have been stripped away.
Yes.
It's all about dots. And we didn't have the time, the luxury to like overanalyze. Once I got done with a script, it's gone unless I get a call from the studio saying like, you got to fix this line because she won't say it that way. Rarely happened. But as far as the theories are concerned, I mean, John might certainly have had images in his mind, and a lot of it, most of the show is of John's psyche, his background. And then there are things that you put into episodes that are private jokes for people or for yourself. But every episode was another reality. We didn't have to, because they could easily have been spies or mistaken as spies or have doppelgangers who were spies. It's that could be an episode. So you
didn't need it. You didn't need it at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah. We were writing our own, insanity and twisting our own tails. So we didn't need to go further than what the script called for, really.
Sure. Yeah.
And then, looking back, I'm starting to feel as other people do about, it's like, oh, there's more there than meets the eye, and I wrote it.
Yeah.
Right.
I really like when that happens as a writer, when things surprise us, because it feels like they're kind of there all along. They were going to be there for us to find regardless.
I mean, one of the things I found very early on in Courage, I'm not sure if these were Irv days or you had already been there. I went to a couple of sessions with John, and we had a lot of discussion about plot and character and all that kind of stuff. For me, there was like a Bible. There was a Courage Bible. And it was very straight up. It was like this guy and this woman, they live in nowhere, Kansas, and they have this dog. And there's monsters all over the place, and Courage is always trying to save them, and he succeeds. And that's the whole premise. It was like 4 paragraphs or something. So you could read a lot of different things in it. I asked John a lot of questions about a lot of things. One of them was, why do Eustace and Muriel have opaque glasses? He said, because they're spiritually blind.
Yeah. I love that.
Wow. Incredible.
Stuff like that.
Right. And
incredible.
That's like more subtle stuff than theories, which are much larger.
Like representations of those elements, like you mentioned, of his psyche.
Yeah, it's kind of like Paul is dead. This thing goes crazy all over the world. Paul McCartney is dead. No, he's not dead. Here I am. I'm crossing the street, blah, blah. So all this stuff takes off. And with the internet, it's even crazier. There's so many wacky stuff, wacky bits and threads. And I find some of them funny, some of them interesting, and some of them truly nuts. And I don't really go after them. If they're, people send me stuff sometimes. What do you think about this? As far as I'm concerned, I go back to those 4 paragraphs. That's what it's about.
Yeah. If I could jump on that, Jody, you're absolutely right. And this is something that I point out if I'm teaching a class or if I'm just talking like this. The concept behind Courage was brilliant because it was simple. It was pure. Courage has to live up to his name. And it's hard for him because he's frightened to save his mother figure from all the monsters in the world that she's blind to because she does not see evil. That was my vision of her.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
She doesn't see, she doesn't recognize evil. She would not have married Eustace if she did. And
wow.
So that was kind of my construct, for, and look, maybe it's something John said to me that just embedded itself. I don't even really remember, but so the construct, and she's married to like the worst guy in the world, and she's a magnet for every
bad thing.
And courage has to, and it's just such a pure little triangle and something that's relatable and immediately gettable. I mean, some of the best ideas seem that simple, as we talked about songs with 3 chords. Those sentences, that's the show for us, and then there's all the other filigree and how you go deep into that. Just because it's a simple simple skeleton doesn't mean that it doesn't have great depth and potential in so many ways.
It's like
and
the
also
rules.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's like the rules and the logic of the Courage universe. It exists in a vacuum. It's its own world. So no fan theory is ever going to live up to what it actually was, because it was its own pocket
you're
of the
applying
universe.
rules that don't apply.
Yeah, it's very simple and pure. And the other thing is that if you guys had known, I did the Scooby-Doo meets Courage thing. Andy and I did this.
Yeah.
And so that was Thea's last performance.
Yeah.
They got a guy called Jeff Berger who did Eustace, and he really did a great job. And
Nice.
Paul did a lot of voices on there and stuff. But as Muriel was in many ways the heart of the show, Thea was the heart. She was like amazing as Muriel. I mean, she had a kind of innocence like in her performance that was so touching and so pure and so wonderful. If there's ever going to be another Courage, I don't know who the fuck they're ever going to get to replace her, because there was just something about her that was extraordinary. I don't know, David, do you agree with that? I mean,
absolutely. Her performance and they were hard to separate. I mean, they're distinctly different, but it was all of a piece. It was all of Thea as a singular human being. Yes, there was an absolute purity in her performance. You believed that she didn't.
Yeah.
That she saw no evil.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Intended for it, and that her love for courage was pure. Part of the takeaway there, as I think about it now, is we can forgive people their blindness sometimes. To certain things in the world. We all know people who don't pay attention to the same things we pay attention to, who aren't scared by the same things we're scared by.
Yeah.
And some are harder to forgive than others, but it never occurred to me for a moment that Muriel, like, for God's sake, why doesn't she notice that Courage was just like hauled away by some awful creature?
Right.
Sure.
I think, as you're speaking, that it's kind of occurring to me too, that she did that innocence that you're talking about 100% comes through, because I never get angry at her. I get angry at Eustace. You're supposed to get angry at him, but I don't get angry at her. I'm just like, oh no, Muriel, like, oh no, like I want to help her too. I'm looking at it through Courage's eyes. And that innocence is part of why, even though it continues to happen, she never really learns her lesson or learns to pay attention, I guess. Like you said, it's easy to forgive her that, because you believe that she's just not seeing it.
Yeah. And there's also some actors who are able, and in the case of doing that in the animation, makes it really extraordinary. There are some actors out there who you don't see acting. You don't hear acting.
Right.
They're just that character.
Yeah.
Like, contemporaneously, Caitlin Dever is this
she's great.
Incredible actress who you never see acting. She just inhabits that character. She becomes that character, and Thea was like that. Thea just was Muriel. And probably, I actually never saw her, doing a performance in the studio, because a lot of that stuff was done when I was nowhere around. But I could just see her, standing there. Yes, sure. Doing that. She just had that wonderful thing. And Thea was petite. She wasn't chunky Muriel. She was a tiny little thing.
Yeah. Last time I saw her was at that
we both saw her,
party, and it was very touching because Andy had passed away not that long before that, her husband, and I gave her my belated condolences, and asked her how she was doing, and she kind of like broke down a bit.
Oh.
And it was very touching. I mean, she was very an unguarded person, and it showed in grief as well, And when she passed, there was like an outpouring of courage, love,
totally,
for Muriel.
Yeah.
I don't think I think we've had 2 Eustaces die, and nobody, and both of them with real high end resumes as far as their.
Absolutely, and did a phenomenal job as the character.
Yeah.
The voice is iconic, but the character was not, or is iconic, but not for the ways that you would want. So
right.
It doesn't get the same kind of fanfare.
Yeah.
Man.
The other thing, talking about fads and everything, that I love is courage tattoos, and people send me pictures of courage tattoos.
Yeah.
Yes.
And my younger son is studying tattoo.
Wow. Okay.
He's an artist. He went to school for hip hop production. So of course he's a tattoo artist.
That's cool.
That is very cool.
The other thing was on that last thing that night that you're talking about, that whatever it was, 20th anniversary of Courage. I took a bunch of pictures of Thea with John. They turned out to be like the last pictures with John. And so like when she died, I said, "Hey John, here's some pictures. I don't know if you want to post these or what." But he posted them all. He said, "Here we are. Here's, Muriel and myself." And this, it was just very touching.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That is one thing it sounds like that the research didn't lie about, because the things that I read did speak very highly of her and her relationship with John too.
She was incredibly loved. And also relationship with Marty. They got really close during the Scooby-Doo Courage shoot.
Wow.
And apparently from what Marty told me, they talked almost every night. They were both night owls. So they would talk until like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning or something. She was alone. Marty's wife is a nurse and, would go to bed early or be out, working or something. And they became like really, really close. And Marty was really busted up totally because he had just found this old soul that was a new friend.
Right.
Man.
Oh my gosh. Hearing that, like, it makes me want to tear up just because, and imagining, all of the connections that I have to Courage and Muriel and their relationship, like,
yeah, because it was so special between them two on the show for all those years. Like, it just lives.
Yeah, it was just like her, it was baked into her voice. Courage. I just hear her voice in my head.
Courage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Oh, that is
one of my favorite Muriel lines. I wrote it, but it just
we were going to get to this. I really appreciate that you bring that up. We wanted to ask about favorite things that you've written.
Sure, yeah. Let's transition into this.
Yeah.
Perfect. I'll answer the question you're about to ask. I will have answered it once you ask it. So, just a line. I mean, this speaks to the specificity of the character, and both in John's creation and Thea's performance. Certain words started suggesting themselves, and I think it might have been in Valkyries. It was in an episode or some. It wasn't Goose God. It was something where she's taken into the clouds or something. It was Norse. There's probably Valkyries, but she shows up for what she thinks is like a cruise or whatever. Yeah. And it turns out, and she's walking around. She says, "Oh my, this is all so authentic." Yeah,
it's from the Valkyries.
And I just remember saying, I love that word for her. Just like I remember writing it and saying like, that's so right. It's so Muriel. And there was more than any other character in the show. Writing her dialogue, things just kept suggesting themselves, and certain Angloisms certainly, but Courage, of course, hardly said anything, and there was always an issue about whether he should say anything or not. I was really on the fence about it. And with Eustace writing his dialogue, some lines were more fun than others to write. But a lot of it was Muriel and then the guest villain.
Yes.
Right.
And courage reaction, usually wordless, but certainly Freaky Fred was one of my favorite because it was in verse, and not because he was holding Courage prisoner in a bathroom and shaving him, which scared the crap out of me.
It's pretty spooky.
That image is burned into my brain.
Yeah, I think Linda Semensky, if I recall correctly, Jody, maybe you told me, she was not a big fan. She was really creeped out by it.
Wow.
And some people were. And people, there are theories about what it's about, and I don't want to go into them unless you want to mention them. That's fine. but where I've had to say that was not on my mind at all.
Right.
And this was a concept that John presented, but I didn't question it. I just fulfilled.
Just wrote for it, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was so many things, as you've mentioned, that came out of John's psyche. Stuff that we'll never figure out. There's all, stuff like he had this thing about Albany, New York. I'm not going to get into too many personal things with John, but there would be all these little things baked in there. Like get out of here, and then the suitcase would say Albany on it.
Right.
So it'd be like these kinds of things.
Very specific to his.
Very specific to him, and he had self-referential stuff all over the show.
Yes.
And I had a little bit of insight because he and I spent a lot of time together at one time. He also, I'll never forget the last show, which was, I believe, Perfect, or that was the first part of the last 211s. And he'd gotten this book that he was reading, obviously, when, I don't know what he brought to you, David, but he was reading this book about perfection. And he was showing me all this stuff about how perfection is terrible, and you should blah blah blah. But that was actually just kind of like, John, that's kind of a construct. I think you're always trying to be perfect. No, I'm not. So it was like whatever. But it was just like he had an incredible, like he did with visual images. He was always looking for great colors and great images by going through art books and all kinds of stuff. Also his own private study. But he also had an incredible wide range of subjects that he was interested in that he brought into the show. Whether he brought them to David as like 2 paragraphs and then he went on, but there was a lot of stuff behind that somehow is probably baked into the show that I don't know.
It's like we were talking about earlier with collecting stories, and it seems like, John had an extensive library in his head that he was pulling from.
Yeah. And it was a psychedelic library.
That too.
It was well. I did want to further answer your question about dialogue or things I wrote that. One of the characters, and Jody and I were just talking about this recently. One of the characters I loved writing and felt like I was sort of creating from the inside was Schwick from Courage in the Big Stinking City, which is one of my favorite episodes. And the way I heard Bushwick was in this, you see that door? You want to know what's on the other side of that door? You don't want to know what's on the other side. It was like he speaks in threes. And I don't remember who did the voice, but whoever it was nailed it. It was exactly what I was hearing, or a version of exactly what I was hearing. Yeah. If that makes sense. It's like I just found like a rhythm. You find a rhythm to a character or a particular quirk that a character has. And there's in that first script we wrote, in the Honey Bunnies that Roger and I wrote, there was a guy we went to college with who would interrupt himself. No. He wouldn't just interrupt himself. He would would stop everything he said. No, and he would build, and it was no, always no, and building bigger. And we just put that in a script. It didn't need any direction, and it was Sandy Barron, but he was the agent, Leo Bushmiller, and we just put that in. We just put every few words. No, no, and he got it. And that's one of the secrets to good dialogue is hearing the music in people's voices, hearing the rhythm and recording that in your head. And in this case, I could sit down with my buddy and say, hey, let's do what, I forget the guy's name, but the way he used to talk, remember that? Let's put that in. Yeah. And whether it's a performer like Thea, with whom you're creating a character. I mean, that's one of the greatest relationships, whether you meet the performer or not, is like you are sharing, said it about Madeline Kahn, very intimate thing. At least in my head at 3 a.m. when I'm
we completely understand that.
Completely checks out.
But my favorite dialogue is always stuff that has some kind of rhythm to it, some kind of stuff that you could score to or could be a lyric, and there are tricks to it, but there's something, when it sort of emerges naturally, it's great. And I had, as a San Diego Comic-Con a few years ago being a few years ago with an additional 3 years
of pandemic time.
yeah. Back in those days, as a San Diego Comic-Con in the teens of this century, I was wearing my Courage t-shirt because how else does somebody come up to a writer and say, hey, I love Courage? Oh, well, I worked on the show.
Mad respect. I would do it too.
I was wearing the Courage shirt, and a guy came up to me, and we got to talking, and I have it, shot it on video on my phone. He did the Schwick monologue perfectly. Wow. He had it memorized, and it was just this random meet, and at Comic-Con San Diego. Yes, that is where you'd meet.
You got the right demographic there,
right?
For that sort of occurrence.
Exactly, but oh my God, this is something I remember sitting alone and writing this in my underwear at 3 a.m, and here I am fully clothed, and
in my Courage t-shirt,
right, in my Courage shirt, and this stranger is performing this thing for me exactly.
That's
as
amazing.
I heard it. And it makes you want to get up in the morning and live a life.
You're speaking to two writers at heart. Growing up, that's all I did was fill notebooks, and Christian went to school for it. Like, we understand that so deeply, and the idea that something that you invent in your head, it means what it means to you, and then you put it out there, and it can just go in all these directions that you never would have expected.
When I was working on Alf, the primetime series, Alf Tales, the cartoon, we were doing an episode in which Alf was terrified of dying in an earthquake. I didn't write the episode, but we're sitting around the table as writers do, and we were coming up with Alf spitting out euphemisms for death. This is what he's afraid of, and everybody's saying kicking up daisies, buying the farm. That was the task. And of course, I have to make it harder for myself. So, all right, what has nobody ever come up with before?
Sure, yeah.
And I contributed buy the box condo. I don't want to buy the box condo.
Oh, that's good.
Thank you.
That's good.
And so a couple of years later, I was working Parker Lewis. Wendy, who did makeup on the show, used that phrase to describe a recent death. And I said, where did you hear that? And she said, I think, isn't that something people say all the time? And I said, wow, maybe now. I said, but
you made it.
But she said, yeah, I might have heard it on Alf. And then cut to recently, and my buddy from high school, Barry Letterman, who was a math genius and a trombone player and one of the funniest people I know. Barry became an Orthodox rabbi in San Diego. Still hilarious guy, and we text a lot, like really stupid jokes. And he called me up one day and he said, "You're famous." And I said, "What do you mean, Rabbi?"
Nice to hear, but
yeah. He said, "Those Uncle John's bathroom readers books?" And I said, "Yeah, I've seen them in bathrooms. There are several volumes." He said, "Did you see the latest volume?" I said, "No, I don't have a subscription." But please tell me, where are you going with this? And he said, "Remember your bought the box condo thing? There was just in this bathroom reader, it was euphemisms for death."
Oh,
and he said, I said, "It said bought the box condo." He said, "No, it said bought the pine condo." He said, "Yours is better."
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
But this has to have come from your, this is
it has to have
a misremembering. And I said, "But it's a different thing. Maybe somebody thought of it." And then he went spiritually as a rabbi and as a brilliant mathematician, started trying to prove to me how in the harmony of the universe, this had to be from my original.
Yeah. How statistically unlikely it would be for somebody else to come up with the same words. in that fashion.
And whether yes or no, I mean, people hear things and reconstruct things.
Yes.
And, to this day, I can't be sure that I didn't hear it, prior to that. But that's just really like, beyond memes and all, even before memes or this, getting a random line of dialogue into the culture.
Yes.
Is just
it's a legacy of amazing. A whole different kind. Absolutely.
Yeah. And they don't send you like money for that, but it's very rewarding.
They should.
Yeah, I got something in the Urban Dictionary last year, which is same old shit, different asshole. So
hey,
nice. It's in the Urban Dictionary. That's pretty cool. I like that.
Absolutely counts.
It's not exactly the same level of cool that David's talking about.
Very similar though. We wanted to ask you too, Jody, like what kind of, you have any compositions from the show or anything that lives with you still?
I think there's a lot of stuff that's the very popular stuff with the audience, like Jalost and Human Habit Trail and stuff like that I know, is like inordinately hip. That's just so memorable,
much more beloved.
Yeah, much more beloved. But they're like all my kids, there's a thing that happens when you're really tired or when you just don't feel like it, you have no inspiration, you just go for it. You just let it leak out of you, whatever you got to do, because you have to. I remember listening back and going, oh, that sucks, but I have no more time. I'm already lying, And then like a month later, I don't know what piece I thought was so terrible because it's all of a piece. You just do it. And so like I'm pretty much enamored of most of that show. There's stuff like The Great Fusilli, which a lot of people hated. And, I really had a lot of fun with that.
I think they hated it because it was so creepy.
It was very creepy.
that it would creep out even a Courage fan.
Yeah. And one of the it did. And one of the things that was really funny about that, I tried to get a very specific thing going in the drums. There was like a kind of a drunken oompa thing going on. Right? Yeah. And I couldn't play it badly enough. So, Marty Grabstein came and played it on a snare drum.
That's so great.
So it's Marty. There's a lot of stuff like that. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. Like the sitar in that show is played by Linda Semensky.
Wow.
So John, because of Linda being such an advocate of his, wanted me to play sitar because Linda played sitar.
That's amazing.
So I called her up and said, can you go in the studio and do like some warm-up exercises on the sitar? And you can get as busy as you want or as whatever. So I didn't want them to be so great that it would be like, oh my God, Muriel's like, what the f is she doing in nowhere? So Linda just did these warm-up exercises. And I played a bunch of stuff around it. Andy played a bunch of stuff. But the core of that is Linda. There's a lot of stuff in that show like that is very memorable to me and very memorable and very exciting because it was kind of out of the ordinary,
And she clearly was invested in the show beyond just,
she was totally into it. I mean,
to the network.
I told her how to join ASCAP and everything, and she joined ASCAP, and it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And also awesome. there are these little cues that became so iconic, one of which you guys had mentioned before, like what I call the anxiety cue.
Right, yeah.
Well, if you listen to the anxiety cue, it's just SOS. It's like a version of...
You're blowing my mind right now, but I hear it in my head.
So it'd be like, Courage would get very excited, and would attempt to do something. This would either be the catalyst for him to take on a task, or it'd be something while he was taking on a task.
Yeah, it goes into like Mission Impossible mode. Yeah,
exactly, exactly. And so it was built up into different ones. Like a couple of times we did bongos with it. Andy and I did all kinds of stuff with it to make it work. Incredible. But the original one was literally SOS. It's like, what can we do? And John was like, oh, that's so great.
That's why I want to point out also, and I didn't know that about the SOS. That's hilarious, Joey. There's always something you find out. But Muriel did get out of nowhere to perform at Radio City.
That's correct.
Music Hall in Courage of the Big Stinking City, and that, that's Linda, and that's the reason that episode exists.
Awesome.
I remember a discussion with John, and it's hard to remember what came from where, but I remember John saying to me, "You mean the train is going to drive right up onto the stage?" And I remember seeing him process that, and boy, did he make it work brilliantly. Often it was, there were 2 episodes, I think, that he was like out of the country and nobody knew where it was. And I was like, I think it's Uncommon Cold and Wrath of the Librarian. As mentioned, there's 2 episodes, and I like them a lot. And the show had to produce its product.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And John wasn't there. So Winnie Chafee, the line producer who Jody and I love, and she worked on Alf Tales. I didn't know who she was. I knew her name, and she knew me decades later when I was working on Courage and knew my work, and it was wild. But
I love when those things happen.
Yeah,
it just falls in on itself, because that comes up with a lot of what we talk about. I think that's why so much of it is it feels so similar to us that we grew up on. It was all the same people behind it.
Yeah, it's you find these threads, and to this day, I'll be watching something and I'll think, boy, that performer, whoever that is I'd love to. And then I realize, well, either I did work with that person or I worked with somebody who worked with him. The degrees of separation get smaller and smaller. Right.
They do. Yeah.
And when the first movie you write stars the voice of Kevin Bacon and is produced by Steven Spielberg, really, where do you go? You never get another movie produced. That was Balto.
Balto. I've been wanting to bring up Balto for the entire time, and I hadn't found a way to work it in.
We're going to cover Balto one day. So
yeah, we're going to do a whole episode on Balto.
We'll have to pick your brain on that big.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Balto was formative for me.
Talking dogs are me. Talking dogs.
Yes. Talking dogs were me too. Just to insert that anecdote. As a kid, I would write, like I said, I would fill journals and just writing constantly all the time. And my mom tells me to this day, she was like, you wrote so many stories about talking dogs, like dogs speaking, dogs experience, like what was going on with a dog. And it was always from the dog's point of view. And I was like, well, Mom, I grew up on Courage and Balto and, all these Oliver and Company, Disney
Call
did it.
the Wild too. We had to read that for school.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always looking at the world from that perspective.
But all the cartoons had talking animals.
Loved.
Yeah, just to be clear, I didn't write Call of the Wild, but the common mistake.
Sure.
But yeah, Balto was huge, and I talk to Christian about it all the time. I cannot wait to cover Balto on the show because
because you just closed our connection to Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, that much more.
Much more.
I know you're just now. You're just. Am I the 1 degree of Kevin Bacon, or you 2 degrees of Kevin?
I think are we 2 degrees? Yeah, I think
we'd be 2.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Sounds like 2.
I guess the highest score you can get is 1 degree.
Do you hear that, listener? We're now 2 degrees. So
and that makes our listeners
know us.
He recently he posted a short clip of himself in Central Park, and there's a statue of Balto in Central Park.
Yes.
He's like walking up, and he goes, "Hey, I played this guy."
Oh,
it's like
awesome.
and he does nice little videos. He and his wife Kira Sedgwick.
That is so great.
Those kids went to school with
I've been to New York. Oh, of course they did.
Or something like that.
The times that I've been to New York, I've had visiting that statue on my list of things to do, and I still haven't made it there in my visits. So it's
let me know when you're here. Let me know when you're here.
Yeah,
I want to go with you. I want to go.
Yes, I would love to do that. Oh my gosh, you have no idea. You talk about fangirling. Like child Kaylin is losing her mind. Balto was huge for me. Sorry,
you're blowing my mind and Jody's, I'm sure, in terms of, I can't tell you how grateful, I'll speak for both of us, we are to hear how grateful you are.
Yeah.
I had told Christian that I hoped this would be the love fest that we get to finally say to someone that made such an impact on us, how much of an impact they made. And we know how much that means to us, on the tiny scale we experience it. So we mean every word of it just so wholeheartedly that you changed our lives.
Oh my
Can't
God.
understate it. Like,
I mean, absolutely.
Thank you.
Defines
and it's
so
not
much
just
of
us
our
either.
upbringing.
And it's
No,
not
look,
just us.
I'm always amazed by how many fans of Courage, but of some other things too. Some other stuff like we've got all kinds of weird accolades from Clifford, the big red dog.
Yes, Clifford.
Another dog. I was known for a while as the dog composer or the composing dog. I don't know which I was, but the reality is that you get a lot of wacky folks, but you also get people that really touch you.
Yeah. Were you going to just talk about it?
No, you can tell that story. You tell it really well.
Oh, thank you. Give me a little musical accompaniment, Jody. Well, the story goes a little something like this.
Hey.
Yeah. For the Clifford movie, wrote a song. We sent you the song "Until I Go," and I was going to mention it when Jody was talking before about producing a song, because my God, that song shines. It's a terrific song, and I say that in tribute to Jody. I mean, it's a terrific record. Is what I'm saying. First, I'll say we wrote it as a Band-Aid on the Clifford movie. There really was no tension, because Clifford is going away. Clifford thinks he's eating his family out of house and home because he overhears something, and he goes off to
this movie.
A talent show. What?
It's ringing bells, but I don't remember when or how I saw it.
He goes off to a talent show, and the prize is a lifetime supply of dog food. So he's going to win this dog, but he's coming home. So he's leaving and he's coming home. Where's the tension in that? Sure. It's sort of implied. So we were tasked with writing a song for that moment when he leaves. And I thought, what's the moment? He's coming back. And I thought, what in my life reminds me of this moment? Like, let me try to find a way to relate to it. I thought, okay, I lived in LA for 10 years and we had one kid and moved back to New York, had another kid. And then I was traveling back and forth a lot. And I thought of, okay, there's something the kids hate to see you go, but you're coming back. Okay, that has resonance to me because they would cry. I have two boys, and they, just, Daddy. And I thought, well, if I had my lyricist hat on at those moments, I would have said to them, well, I can't come home until I go.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, there's the song. It's a yin and yang song. And the sun only rises from a dark, dark sky. Answers only come to satisfy why. And it wonderful time writing it with Jody, because we were like really inside the music together and the lyrics, and it was like this fabulous experience. And then our frustration is that it was never, that nobody submitted it for the Oscars or a Grammy or anything, or made a record of it. It was just on the soundtrack. So now I've told you the origin of the song. Jody got an email. This was the first of several some years ago. And it was from a woman whose father, who was the patriarch of the family, had been in a car accident and suffered brain damage. And he had a music therapy tape, music therapy mix that he would listen to.
I'm anticipating where you're going with this, and that's already
his granddaughter, the woman's daughter, 3 years old, 4 years old, is watching watching Clifford in the next room, and the song comes up in full on the closing credits. It's a little bit of it in the movie. He hears it from the other room, and he brightens up, and he reacted to it. Where can I get a copy of this? I want to put it on his music therapy mix.
Wow.
And we just had to send her, sorry, Warner Brothers, go sue me. You didn't make a record out of it. We sent her an MP3. We got an email from a guy with an autistic daughter, same story.
Yeah.
And several more.
Yeah.
And we felt like, wow, we really tapped into something. And it came from a genuine emotion, a real feeling. And it's
a great song. I can tell you, listener, it's a great song. We've heard it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. But it had the point is it had completely unintended consequences. And it just, it's kind of like the ripples. It's kind of like throwing that rock in the lake, and where are those ripples going to go, and this it was really tearful reading that. It's just amazing, we had been through stuff where, it was like, well, is it going to put butts in the seats? All that kind of stuff. They didn't want to spend any more money on Clifford. And if you look at the song on iTunes, on YouTube now, there's like 9 zillion. I remember this. Oh, this is the best song. And you get all this stuff.
The internet is great. It's horrible and wonderful. And that is one of the ways it's wonderful.
That is one of the ways it's very wonderful, because it was like, okay, it didn't sell 1 million records, but guess what? It affected a lot of people.
It affected people
in a really good way.
Yeah. And it came from the heart. And actually, the movie reviewer for the New York Times, A.O. Scott, at the time, reviewed the movie. And as I recall, it said, there's no real tension here. I'm paraphrasing. The plot lacks any device by which you'd be concerned as a character in the movie. But there is a very pretty song in there. Kind of, glosses over the moment. I'm rewriting it, I'm sure, but the point was made, great. And I felt good that at least somebody noticed it at the New York Times, of all places. But yeah, it's really wonderful to know you've had that effect on people. But there was something so special about that song, and the responses that we got, and that's only the ones we heard.
Right, it's just infinite, the ripples that are actually out there.
Indeed, yeah, and while I say that I'm very happy to scare the shit out of little kids, I'm also very happy to enable and ennoble them to go on with the rest of their lives,
Yes.
Yeah, so, you could do it at the same time.
You did. Often.
It's amazing, yeah.
Every day, really. We as writers, and I know, Jody, also you write music, and it's all kind of connected in that way. But we feel like most people, or a lot of people, have this one theme or idea that they come back to in their life as kind of this is the point that I am consciously and unconsciously trying to make with the things that I write, or the things that I make, the things that I create. Really, any artist could have this going on in their life. Yeah, they
say that every artist has the one story they're trying to tell their whole lives. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I believe it, but you hear it a lot. And so we were curious to know if you guys had thoughts on that, or if you have anything that you just compulsively just trying to get out.
It ties into the whole idea that we keep coming back to, find ourselves coming back to, of like following the threads, and you suddenly like find yourself following it, whether you mean to or not.
Well, Jody and I have talked about it. For me, the concept of empathy, which I mentioned earlier, which was actually like the driving force behind this project that I worked on called Treasure Trekkers not too long ago. I don't know where it's available. It's an animated show, and it was empathy. I try to put that in everything I do. The world could use a lot more of it. And
couldn't agree more.
You're speaking, when you're writing children's animation, you're speaking to people, little young people who are developing the sense of empathy as they're watching your show. It's happening. When you're 3 or 4 years old, it's pretty much you and the planet's revolving around you. Then within a year or two, you're thinking about what other people might be feeling. Some people never get to that point, sadly, or retreat from it, or don't care, or use it. There are plenty of sociopaths who are good at knowing what other people
use it to their advantage.
Yeah, exactly. But to truly, not just to care about what somebody else is feeling, but to feel them in the moment, and I say to people, to me, through my life, when people were in despair, I didn't know what, it's like, you want to hold them, you want to save them, you want just the right thing to say, and everybody will say something to you. Everybody will say, look, if you got a cold, did you try orange juice? I hear vitamin C. Yes.
You always want to have something to offer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But then with life's bigger, the loss of a loved one or whatever, and you don't know what to say. And I hate just plugging in predictive text throughout life. My condolences.
I love that you say it that way, because I feel the same way.
That's wonderful. And I would have guessed that. I always try to find the right words for everything. And then my mother-in-law was sick. She was dying, and I didn't know what to say to her or do to her. But it was a moment. She was on a lot of meds, and she was extremely pleasant at them. And I'm not saying she was unpleasant, but
sure,
she was having a fine time. And it's the first time I saw her without makeup. Also, it was a very striking moment. And she's beautiful in a way that I've never noticed, because she's a child actress, so she's painted her face.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. And she was starting, I could see she was starting to despair. And I just put my hand on her back. In that moment, I realized that's the only thing that was like, what else can you do for another human? You touch them.
You're there.
You hold somebody, you look at them in the eyes, and you feel what they're feeling. My father would objectify emotion, and he would look at me as now my eyes are a little teary, and he would say, I can see your eyes are welling, and you're probably feeling a warmth inside in this moment. And, all right, not anymore, Dad. just talked about it, and I'm not there anymore, because he didn't quite know how to deal with emotions.
Right.
My mom was extremely empathetic, to the point of, I have courage scripts of my, she was just loving and caring, that she would read my scripts and write notes all over them and put our lip prints on them. But she was empathetic to a fault. And like, I would be telling her a story in her later years, certainly. And I would say, Mom, I can tell you what happened to me today. What happened to you today? Right. Nothing. It's nothing really bad. It's not really bad. How bad was it? Nothing. Anyway, let me get into the story. She'd be like trying to read my emotion, from across the phone. I said, just let me finish the story, and we'll get there. But my mom had a great deal of empathy. And I think that resonates with me throughout my life. We all fluctuate between being more empathetic and less empathetic, as the moment requires. Sure. But, to have the opportunity to quietly, subtly, gently lay in this theme of empathy, and not even have to try, because it just starts showing up in your work, because it's what you want to say. And it's there, whether it's a math show or Phil of the Future or Balto.
It's the bedrock of where you're operating from. So
it's
going to end up in there.
So that's, for me, that's my recurring theme, that and just, wanting people to laugh.
Yeah.
And or cry. I just want people to feel.
That's awesome.
But not just what they're feeling. I want them to feel what other people are feeling too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
Yep. I'm touched.
Part of David and I have talked about this in work and stuff. And for me, this is I would kind of paraphrase Maya Angelou. It's sort of like, you don't know a man until you walk a mile in his shoes. And this is very of the world that David is talking about. It's a world that sometimes we don't live in at all, but you can find people who do live in that world. And those are the people that we celebrate. And so for me, it's the whole idea of, there's some people that you can't help but judge because they're monsters and they're evil. But there are other people, we won't name any names, but, there are folks out there that, well, why do you think that? What do you mean? And a lot of people are afraid to scratch that scab.
Yes.
Or, and really kind of talk to each other. And
curiosity.
We talk
as
around
a concept.
we talk around each other, oftentimes. And I think that if you tried to get to know somebody a little bit, sometimes you can't go very deep and you just go, okay, this is a losing battle. I'll see you next week or never see you again. But the reality is it's the same kind of thing. Just really, truly trying to see what the other person is. And it's always helped me. When I was like, I had a kind of a blessing, and I'm not going into any spiritual stuff or anything. When I was 12 years old, I was in a car accident. I went through the window to the street, and I was in a coma. I was in a coma for a couple of days. And, my face had to be rebuilt and all. It was all. But I woke up from that having an incredible empathy and respect for life. Like,
Sure,
oh my
yeah.
God, this can like disappear in a nanosecond,
Mhm.
you know? And it changed me.
Mm-hmm.
It's always in the back of my head. Not, you know, I don't feel the physical pain. I don't feel any of it. I don't see it. I don't see, you know, my father was telling my sisters, you're going to go visit Jody and don't be shocked, you know, because I was all fucked up and bloody and everything.
Yeah.
You know, I don't remember any of that shit. I just remember that it was like, wow, I'm alive. Wow, pretty cool.
Wow.
And when it was all over, it changed me. What else can I
Mhm.
say? You know, I
It's
felt
incredible.
like
How
a
old?
better
You said
person.
you were 5, Jody?
12.
12. Okay. So I was putting myself into the thing already because I was 5 when something happened. But at 12, that, you know, that's like you're right on the cusp of adolescence. So your brain is already spinning, and it is a time when I wonder if, you know, empathy has to be put into check a little when you're an adolescent at the beginning, because the world, you're separating from a world and you're thinking about yourself and you're trying to find a place in this new world, and to have that experience as you're sort of crossing that precipice, it must have had a dramatic effect on your adolescence, your young adolescence, whether you know it or not, and you probably know it.
Well, I know some of it, but obviously, you know, I remember looking at a clock, and apparently they were stitching me up, and I was seeing this clock, and the clock was moving, and my father's cousin was a doctor and was not allowed to operate in this particular hospital. So he kept yelling at the doctor to take the stitches out and put them back in. And of course, I'm like, bleh. But, you know, there's all these little bits and pieces and fragments of it that I remember. But I woke up and I felt like really at peace. And again, I'm not going to some sort of whacked out spiritual place. It wasn't like I didn't see a white light and I wasn't, you know, it was just, wow, I'm alive. And that's good. You know? And it sort of like, it gave me a respect for life that I may not have had
before
were it not for such an experience, you know?
Right. Incredibly formative, I'm sure. Yeah.
I feel like for myself, I aspire to be more like that, I'll say.
I have no idea why I felt so peaceful or what, you know, I just felt like grateful to be alive. And also there was I remember there's a rainstorm and we were in New Jersey. I had brought my comic book collection with me, and my comic books were all over the street. And apparently I was walking around picking my comic books up, bleeding profusely because these were like the Marvel comics. They were the original fucking comics. What are you nuts?
My God.
Prized possession.
Wow.
That was all I gave a shit about, you know?
Well,
I hadn't discovered girls yet or anything, you know? So it was kind of like comic books. That was
the passion.
Wow. This kind of, that image, at least, it's going to stick with me, I'll say. But that image kind of ties into, we keep jumping in and out of it, but are either of you fans of horror as a genre?
Yes.
Yes.
Big time. Big time. But certain kinds of horror.
Yes.
I don't really like Jason movies and slasher movies and stuff like that. As Stephen King calls those films morons with cameras. You know, you know, although I do like movies, you know, like the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, which have some imagination and stuff.
Sure.
But my favorite stuff is horror comedy stuff, like Evil Dead, stuff like that. You know, that has those elements, those comic elements, but they scare you while you're laughing.
Do you feel like, was this pre or post Courage that this was something that you enjoyed?
I always loved that stuff. You know, in fact, John and I have talked about this because John's favorite show, his formative shows, were Kolchak, The Night Stalker, and The Twilight Zone. Those were John's biggest influences, according to what he told me. And the Kolchak, The Night Stalker, starred an actor who you may or may not know, but you might know him from The Christmas Story, Darren McGavin, who was the father of that kid, whatever his name was, with glasses. And he's a really he's almost Eustathian, whatever you call it. You know, he's not quite that much of a dickhead.
Eustachian.
But the thing is that this Kolchak thing, he plays like this reporter who's constantly getting drawn into just all kinds of stuff featuring monsters and vampires and all kinds of stuff. And the whole thing of the show is he has to convince other people. So it's very similar to Courage in a way.
Absolutely, Yeah, horror as a genre, we talk about it on this show a lot, and our listeners agree. Like a lot of our listeners feel the same way. Like it encompasses so much. Like you said, there's humor. It's not just always scary for scary's sake. The emotion that we talk about that a lot, the emotional depth and the grief and exploring those emotions in a safe way in terms of a genre that you're watching in entertainment.
I think they're fairy tales for adults. I think they take the fairy tale genre and blow it up. Kids have different fears. They have prepubescent fears. They have pubescent fears. But at the end of the day, the fears that adults have of disease, of, just stuff that adults get really scared of, that kids don't get scared of. And Courage skirted those worlds.
I was about to say, Courage really walked the line there.
He really did.
Yeah, the things that scare us. I mean, there are certain things that stay with us. I was just reading about age-specific fears. A fear of separation follows you through every step of the way. You're afraid of being alone.
Yeah.
Being left alone, certainly by your parents. I was frightened by horror as a kid in a way that made me scared to watch it. And like, I remember walking into a friend's home and Frankenstein was on the TV and I got scared. I said, I'm scared to watch it. But there was Jody will remember this. There was a soap opera called Dark Shadows.
Oh yeah.
Which, has lived on in movies with Johnny Depp. But it was on every day. And it was really cheap. The walls shook every time a coffin lid slammed shut.
Yeah.
And Barnabas Collins was the vampire. And it was like afternoon horror. That kind of drew me in. Like, you'd watch it after school. And it was schlocky. And it wasn't intentionally funny. But it kind of worked its way in. And I was always a fan of like horror in comic books and illustrated novel or graphic novels now. But the first movie I saw, and I think about it, the first movie I saw was Jason and the Argonauts. And
the Ray Harryhausen films were really important to me too.
Yeah, it was. I remember seeing it with my dad. One of the few normal things I did with my dad, and right across the street at the Kent Theater on Coney Island Avenue, watching these warriors resurrected out of bones, but without skin. They just became skeleton warriors. And that image stuck with me pretty damn good.
Sure.
From, the first time I saw it, it could have been last week, and it fascinated me. It didn't scare me so much because it was so engaging. And that's the difference between what I thought horror movies would do. I thought horror movies would just scare the shit out of me and make me feel very unhappy about the world and just more scared. And they might. But there are layers to them. And sometimes it could be comedy. But the artistry of them and the audaciousness of, some of the plots and the places they take you. And we all, have a fear of death to some extent. And part of watching horror is sort of owning, like I walk out of the theater, I'm still alive. It's like, Joe, it's like you coming out of the coma. Except it's a movie theater. Just like that.
Very similar.
But I then became a fan of the classic horror movies. And interestingly, as an adolescent, through the little model kits, you used to like put together glue together and paint Frankenstein. I remember the Wolfman. And the Wolfman, I cut off some hair and I pasted it on, and I ripped up a tissue to make it a shirt. And it was like, I really made this, and my brother painted the whole thing and ruined it. Because that's what little brothers do.
That's fun.
Yeah.
But I always had like this like, not love, hate, but attraction, repulsion relationship with horror. And
I relate to that big time.
And now, having been inside of it as a writer, I really adore it. Genres like horror and fantasy let you go deeper into certain things that reality won't let you go deeper into.
Right? Yeah, sure.
And the show I mentioned earlier that I worked on, Parker Lewis, in the early 90s, it had a lot of fantasy sequences, and it was dealing with the world of adolescence, and these fantasy sequences to me told the stories that were inside the heads of us when we were teenagers, and the fears and the concerns. We had one episode, and it was like a horror movie in which the nerd Jerry is sucked into this netherworld of nerds of geeks who have no sense of self-value. And he starts fading away and becomes black and white. And then his friends have to go like get him out of this other world. And this is just a high school show. It was, very much a Ferris Bueller show and
yeah, wow.
Show. And it when you tell a story sort of objectively and you sort of present what happened, it can be brilliant. It can be wonderful. And you can dive into something surreal. You might be able to better tell a story or get at the emotional truth of who the characters are.
Again, they're like adult fairy tales. You work through stuff. The other thing that's really wonderful about that, first of all, I had a completely different experience because I was brought into the horror comedy genre from the first horror film I ever saw, which was Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Nice.
Which was ridiculous. It was really, really funny. And then I saw the other movies after that and the Ray Harryhausen stuff, which I was really enamored of because that was Bernard Herrmann's scores. All of that.
Yeah.
Some of the best scores. Then I went back and I saw stuff like King Kong and I was, what the hell? There's just such brilliant storytelling, and so I got enamored of the images in the same way that I would write music for Courage. I would be very informed by what people like Bernard Herrmann did, and it was very inspiring.
That's cool. You both found your gateways into that genre.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
In a way that left a mark and lived with you.
Absolutely. And,
cool.
For me, he was kind of my hero and still is because he invented a whole musical language that was heretofore, unknown. He invented a cinematic language. There are many, many other composers that were great, but he was the first one to invent this language. And when you think about it, his first film was Citizen Kane. His last film was Taxi Driver.
Wow.
And in between is all the Alfred Hitchcock film. It's just ridiculous.
The Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone. He did a lot of the music for the Twilight Zone.
Wow.
Just amazing. This guy was just amazing. And each one of his pieces was so iconic and so right that it was kind of very much of the criteria I was talking about before. It was so great that you paid attention to it, but it didn't distract from what was going on. Didn't distract from the dialogue. It was a piece. They were all ironed together. They all melded together perfectly.
Well, and when you left, you found yourself thinking about the pieces, you know, and the music. I do that often.
Yeah.
Your work has to stand up to someone else's work, stand up with someone else's work. Someone like Bernard Herrmann would have run roughshod over lesser directors than the ones who he was fortunate enough to work with.
Absolutely.
His score for Psycho,
it's just insane.
The imagery that Hitchcock got up there, stood up to the music. The music supported each other. You have to be careful who you work with because it might elevate you. It might make you have to be better.
Yeah, it's a house of cards. You're building on each other. That's cool. Element.
Yeah, it's true. But that stuff's like really cool. But I don't, at the end of the day, I do like some of the elements of some of the scores in some of those things. How iconic is it? If you ever see those Friday the 13th movies, the score revolves around a guy going,
yeah.
Right. It's just a guy breathing into a mic and they're adding a delay to it. But it's so effective. Yeah, it's really simple.
It lives, to me, something like that lives in that uncanny valley. Like, this doesn't sound like it's supposed to sound, and you're playing with the idea of somebody's mind anticipating what you're going to do, and then you're not doing it. And you guys, did that all the time on Courage.
We tried.
Yes.
I honestly, thinking about that, that's something that my dad, and before I even had seen the movies, I was very, very young, but my dad would do the to my mom. And she would get so freaked out because it just brought back that, those moments in the movie. And as a kid, I was like, why are you so scared of this? And then once I finally saw it, I was like, oh, I get it now. Okay. Yeah, those iconic things, sometimes it's the simplest thing.
Yeah, all those little tiny things are great. It's like if you listen to the score in like Rosemary's Baby, this Mia Farrow is singing this, kind of lullaby. Oh, and it carries. Every time you hear that, you're thinking of the devil. And it has nothing to do with it.
Right.
Nothing to do with the devil. It's just the context.
Well, speaking of that, Christian, do you want to tie this back into our $1 million question?
Yeah,
I think that we're hearing really what we're here to do on That's Pretty Dark is uncover what inspired the dark things that we grew up with, in the 80s and the 90s, and getting to speak with you all and hearing your inspirations. It's trickling down into what we knew, and because it's what you created from what you knew.
Yeah, we constantly talk about what influenced the creators that have influenced us, that generational cycle over and over again.
I love about researching it online, but it's way better to hear it from you.
So that thought is like, why was media so dark in this time in such a creative, beautiful way? Because there's a lot of people. I mean, it was a lot of shows.
Yeah, I was going to say,
films, just it's not even just the straight up horror, like spooky, scary. It's also the emotional. We think of things like Land Before Time and these Don Bluth movies that were like, why did you have to hurt us like that?
I was going to say, the emotional intelligence.
Huge fan of Secret of Nim. One of my faves.
Incredible.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, but like, the emotional intelligence that explored the human condition at such deep depths.
It's interesting because, that's when Jody and I were, making our careers, the 80s into the 90s and before we knew each other. And when you're doing that, when you're working, you're not like, I wasn't paying as much attention to what was going on around me. Like I went to the movies, and I watched TV. But when I was working in Hollywood, when I was working on primetime shows, you're lucky if you got to go home once in a while. I think that they pay you a lot because it's torture.
Right.
Except some shows are fine. It really depends on who's in charge.
Right.
But as far as the zeitgeist of the time, I don't know that it registered with me as specifically as it did with you, as kids who were born into it, and now looking back at your childhood and then the years just prior to it. For me, there was always, said before, the idea of fantasy or horror, that you can explore this way. That's the stuff I always sought out. I suppose the best way I can answer it is, I watch what I watch. So I'm, what's the prevailing zeitgeist? I hope it's the project I'm working on. I don't know. That it will be part of the zeitgeist in 20 years. I can't predict that. It's interesting, but working on a lot in Hollywood, you're walking through all these fantasies. When I was working on, for instance, on Parker Lewis, which was the Sony lot, which had been the MGM lot. So you just need to know that The Wizard of Oz was shot there.
Yes.
To say, oh my God, I had a spot with my name on it. I lived like I could walk there in 10 minutes, but I never did because I had a spot with my name on it.
You have to use the parking spot when you have it.
And they were shooting so many movies there.
I've toured that lot. It's pretty mind blowing just to walk by and see on the sound stages.
Yeah, absolutely. And like they were shooting Hook. So I was traveling through these pirates, and the extras would take they were there the first time, and there they are smoking cigarettes there. By the time the movie was done, I swear they were like actually pirates. You could see that their attitudes were different. And they were shooting Bram Stoker's Dracula, starring with Keanu Reeves. At the time, and Keanu, I can call Keanu because we had the same manager.
And degrees of separation.
We were like his only clients for 10 minutes at the beginning. He's very successful now, but it was very funny because he had this British accent for the movie, and we saw him, and he was speaking with his British accent to us, Roger and me, and I said, don't want to break the. He said, yeah, I'm in character. I don't want to lose the accent. So I think he might have waited for moments in the movie to lose the accent, but I love the movie, and it's actually written by somebody who became a semi-friend of mine through official, like Writers Guild associations, Jim Hart and Francis Ford Coppola directing it. I got him to autograph in gold pen Laserdisc collections from The Godfather. One was to the executive producer of the show, was for his birthday, and then one was for me.
Wow, that's amazing.
So it was like so many levels of fantasy in Hollywood, because the reality of it is a fantasy, and it's like you're traveling through these bubbles of myth that are forming now, will or won't last, depending upon how the movie does, and all the TV shows that are shot there. It was psychedelic. It was one thing, and it's so different working in New York on animation, because you go to an office on 18th Street and
you're separated from all that stuff.
Right. So I live in Brooklyn Heights, which is Hollywood East. It seems now that Amy Schumer lives here.
Oh, nice.
Among others. It's like the New York Times published her address pretty much. I mean, it's like, don't do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's crazy how easy it is sometimes to find things like that. It scares me so much for people.
Yeah. But life is enchanting if you tune into the right frequency, and if you pay attention to the enchantment. And then, as we were talking about before, and I forget if we were recording or if it was just a conversation we were having earlier, but you have to pay attention and absorb as much as you can and carry it with you. And it's not a burden, and you don't even know what you're carrying with you. But like all these things are just like, my head spins now at my age. I'm not that old. I'm not that young. And so I'm in between things. And this to me is as fascinating and as much a fantasy, talking to you and hearing your take on what we've done. Life is as magical as I always thought it was when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And it's as tragic, and it's as tragic as I always feared.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah. That's what was being spoon-fed to us, is that life is the most magical thing and the most terrible thing. And we just got double doses of that in the media that we were consuming all the time.
There's so much stuff, obviously there's a legacy post-Vietnam that, you guys got. There was also the Reagan legacy.
I was going to say, yeah. Well, we had the Cold War, right? And then we had the missile
Cold
crisis.
War over,
and we had
all these things, AIDS, all this
cultural
stuff.
Fear, right? Yeah.
Fear
and so
just, culturally we were afraid.
Yeah. Also, in the 50s, you weren't hiding under your desk and ducking covering, thinking that was going to protect you from a hydrogen bomb. But the reality is every generation has, their shit that they deal with. But I find that there's some kind of cyclical stuff. If you look at the way the original horror genre began, like in the 20s, then it kind of changed again after the collapse of the world, as far as, in 1929. And then it started to come back again, like in the 30s. And then it's really interesting. Once World War II popped up, there's not a lot of great horror movies. The Wolfman didn't come up to the ankles as far as some of that other stuff is concerned. Like Frankenstein. For me, the most iconic, wonderful movie of that period is The Bride of Frankenstein, which is a horror comedy.
It is, yeah.
And it has a gay sensibility from James Whale, who did this, Dr. Pretorius, who was the biggest, like, Quentin Crisp kind of queen he was hilarious. And, in the 80s, it became very scary because you had AIDS, you had rape. Some of the best movies for me in the 80s were The Fly, with Jeff Goldblum, Dead Zone, a lot of Howard Shore scoring, all these movies were like really cool. And then some of the most terrifying movies, as far as I'm concerned, psychological terror movies, were the movies of Cronenberg. All those Cronenberg films are insane. I mean, they're really terrifying.
He directed
he
directed The Fly, didn't he, Cronenberg?
He directed The Fly, but that's the most commercial movie. His other things were all dealt with sexual, weird, bizarre viruses and parasites. A movie called The Brood, which is the horrifying movie I've ever seen. Wow. So all that stuff, and then again, in the 90s, The Evil Dead, which was hilariously ridiculous over the top. And I don't even know if they make real horror movies anymore. I think that in order to be able to make something that's that iconic, I don't think they're willing to take the chances on that. They make these big, huge, big budget remakes of House on Haunted Hill or something, and they're pretty terrible. They have great special effects, but they have no heart. They have no people. They have no characters at all.
Yeah, the heart of the horror is the people. It's the humans experiencing something.
And the monster, if you're looking at Frankenstein's monster, you're looking at a misunderstood child. Who doesn't really want to kill a little girl, just wants to play with her flower the way she's playing with it.
Exactly.
And to have empathy for the monster, who didn't ask to be created.
Yep.
Which, by the way, is the progenitor of the first line of the Pinocchio song that I sent you. Dear Papa, I didn't ask to be carved.
Yes.
Which I thought was going to be funny. I thought it was going to be really funny. And then
it got a little darker as we moved through that song.
Dear Papa, I didn't ask to be carved. You just had to beget a boy made of wood and rage and regret. Witness the pain of the sentient marionette.
It became kind of bleak, but I was like, geez, what would it be like to be Pinocchio? And that hasn't been explored from an actual biological level. I'm at once in love with magic and fantasy, but also reality. And you sort of want things to make sense, even in terms of the invented universe, of course. But, I was a very literal child. And I remember thinking, like, you'd see a Pinocchio thing, what would it feel like to be made out of wood and have to walk around? And then you're turning into a real boy. God, that must hurt the wood. And, that was, I realized as I'm saying this, that my experience with horror was often just the way I was looking at a cartoon. That wasn't a horror at all. Although Pinocchio, the Disney movie, is
it's pretty horrific.
I mean, when Lampwick is that? Yeah, Lampwick turns into a fucking donkey. Oh my God, that's like
pure
just extraordinarily scary.
You did a Pinocchio episode, didn't you?
We did. Yeah, we talked about Pinocchio.
Listening to it.
It is it's pretty dark if you want to call it that. If you may
say so yourself.
If I may say so myself, it's definitely pretty dark. But speaking of Pinocchio, I think that's a great opportunity. Thank you, by the way, for everything, all of the insight that you've been able to give us, not only on your careers, but the industry at the time, and just letting us know that it is as magical as we imagine it to be, and as horrible at the same time. That's so great. But at this point, I really would love to just briefly, you mentioned the Pinocchio song. We're going to lay in a little bit of it because listeners, you guys, they've been so generous to just provide us with these tracks for you to hear. And some of them never before heard, really, in this context. So I
think we spent our entire evening last night and most of today listening
we
to
did,
all this stuff you guys sent us.
Me too.
It's great.
Thank you for saying that. And the Pinocchio, it's something that sort of dropped because of all the Pinocchio stuff that was going on. And it was early in the pandemic or before the pandemic. And then there was a singer performing in the neighborhood, doing these little street performances and he had guests. And there was a young woman who I knew as a little girl because she went to school with my kids. And she's a fabulous singer. And she's in London now doing brilliant things. And I was thinking she'd be a great Pinocchio. She recorded a version of it. But ideally, I think we imagine an operatic, a countertenor, like some ethereal, thin voice for this essentially Pinocchio's final letter to Geppetto, his final message to Geppetto. And I had laid down a vocal just as a scratch, and because I'm not an operatic countertenor, but when I sent it to you guys, I said, like, yeah, I wish this sounded better. And then I just was playing with Logic on the computer, and I pitched it up an octave.
Nice.
And I played for Jody over the phone. He said, "Oh, you sang it falsetto." I said, "No, the computer sang it falsetto." So it's a little hinky in spots because I really did it on the fly very quickly.
Well, it does give it that ethereal sort of disembodied.
Yes.
That's the word. Yes.
It's a work in progress, man. It's a work in progress.
It's great from our perspective. It's so great.
That's a lot of fun.
Thank you. Yeah, I loved working on that song, and we want to expand upon it, because often, at least I'll write, if I'm writing something, I'll also think, oh, this is the penultimate song in a show, a musical. I didn't realize it was writing it. It stands by itself, but man, it implies a story that preceded it.
Yes. And I want to hear that whole musical. Like,
I don't care how much Pinocchio stuff is out there. I can't get enough, especially after researching it.
Right. It
really keeps going.
The original story, which,
Disney.
That's right.
Yeah. Right. And it also ain't a well-structured story.
No.
It was chaptered.
It was a bit cobbled together.
Yeah. I mean, Pinocchio had to be resurrected from the dead, as you guys know. He was left hanging at the side of the road from a tree, dead. That was the end of Pinocchio. But you can't kill your honey bunnies.
You can't, not in that case.
Kill your
you have to bring them back from the dead.
And Carlo Collodi couldn't kill his, and they said, we want to do more stories, so we cut him down from the tree, and he said, okay. And
that's how it goes.
Yeah.
150 years ago or whatever it was.
Yeah, and it's got a strange malleability. It's a pliable story that you can bend in different ways and
for different generations.
Right.
And
that it was a highlight of Disney's entire, from beginning to
for
now.
A long time.
It because it was dark, because it was far truer to the original story than Cinderella could possibly be. Horrifying. Lampwick turning into the donkey in the shadow. Wow. That's a horror movie, right?
It is a horror movie. It's a horror movie.
And that's the song is Pinocchio, the horror movie. I'll just say quickly that one of everyone's favorite horror comedies, musicals, is Rocky Horror.
Yes.
That's also been a big influence on me. And I was one of the original virgins when it comes to seeing Rocky Horror, because I saw it on Broadway live. It ran for like 3 weeks on Broadway.
Wow.
My girlfriend in high school had a press pass. She was going to review it for a paper. I think she was in college actually by that point. So she was reviewing for a college paper. So we went, and we didn't know what to expect. I didn't know anything about it. And I'm sitting there, and Tim Curry was in it, and Richard O'Brien, and Meatloaf, and there was a runway, and Tim Curry's high kicking over my head and singing about being a sweet transvestite, and oh my god, and oh my god, and oh my god, what the hell did I just see? And then it became this huge thing, and then I got to work with Richard O'Brien.
Wow.
Years later, because Roger and I wrote a pilot at Castle Rock called My Dead Body, which got us so much work because it was so good, and it was never produced because the person who wanted it to produce it was no longer at the studio. And it just was like a year of development on a project. But anyway, so we do this thing, and we don't know what's going to happen with it yet. Spend a week with Richard O'Brien, and we're saying goodbye. And in Hollywood, everyone hugs. I hugged Richard and got a pelvic thrust.
Wow.
From the man who invented it, who invented the time warp.
Yeah, literally invented it.
Nice.
I don't know if that was his signature move, or
if it was just for your benefit,
or if he was drunk. I don't know.
We'll choose to believe it was just for you.
It was, well, yeah, it wasn't just for the guy standing next to me, that's for sure. And I appreciated being appreciated to you guys. by Richard O'Brien. I mean, that he thought well enough to do the thing. But man, that was a moment, a precious moment.
Oh, that's great.
And Richard O'Brien, if you're out there, please don't sue me. It happened, and I love you forever.
Yeah, we're all okay with it here on That's Pretty Dark, which I'm sure you're listening to.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, there is just.
I'm sorry,
I
steered us like into another.
Yeah, where were we?
That's okay. I don't know where we went, but I liked going there.
Yeah, but I
liked how we got here.
Yeah, but talking about influences in horror comedy, we deal with so many of our problems through telling tales of the dead, of resurrection, of superheroes. Mm-hmm. Superman was created by Siegel and Schuster, two Jewish men, and it was a parable for the stranger coming to the new place. And I'm sure that the origins of these horror stories have their own antecedents in the psychology of a culture, as well as the psychology of the individual. And sometimes there's very little difference, so it's interesting. I would love to do, and I think that the world is always ready for a horror comedy musical.
Yes.
I mean,
couldn't agree more.
Who wouldn't?
I know I am personally.
Well, okay. Then Jody, we got to finish.
You guys got to do it.
Gotta make it happen. Oh my God.
Got to do it for Kaylin. We'll do it for Kaylin and Christian.
That's right.
I'm down.
We'll be there front row.
Oh yeah, seriously.
For sure.
Well, yeah, I feel like we've been able to explore so much with both of you, and I've had the best time, honestly. I would continue talking forever if we could, but I know that your time is so valuable. And so we just are so lucky that you've taken this time to chat with us. And there are even songs that we didn't get to, which I think I would love, if you're open to it, we'd love to chat with you about it another time. I feel like there's just so much. Part
6 of your conversation.
Well, especially when we get to future Courage episodes or characters or Ride of the Valkyries. I mean, we're going to have a whole conversation about that or something. So we'd love to hear from you guys in the future.
Yeah. At any point, if you just have a courage thought, we would
even
love
if it's an email or a text or a voice message or literally anything.
I'll send you. Cool. I almost texted you, Kaylin, that I just was going to text you back something, and I just looked at my camera reel to see what's the most recent thing I had. Is it a picture she sent to Kaylin just to say thumbs up on the last, and it was a courage tattoo.
No way.
But then I stopped myself. I said, I got to get the rest of this thing ready and check on the computer. But yeah, I'm sure we'll be in touch.
But there are other songs that we didn't get to talk about that I would love to talk about, separately. So hopefully we can give them their due.
For sure. Absolutely. This was a total pleasure.
Yeah.
Truly.
It was for us.
A TP. It was a TP.
A TP.
Total pleasure. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for your time. It's incredible. It was so wonderful.
Sure, thank you.
On behalf of us and the listeners, to hear from both of you is just so invaluable. Mm-hmm. And we can't believe that we are having the opportunity to speak with two of the sources of the darkness that we remember so fondly, and that was the genesis of this whole podcast and so many late night conversations, between the two of us. We can't believe it's gotten to this point. So we're just so grateful.
Cool.
You wanna give them the line?
You f***ed this up, and we are eternally grateful.
Yeah.
I could see Kaylin typing the note, like she's like, "Wait, see."
I was like, right here it is.
We have our document open.
Yeah, you f***ed me up. There. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Incredible.
Well, it was our pleasure.
We wouldn't have it any other way.
We're equally up as you, believe me, by the looking inside the experience in a different way. But thank you so much for your appreciation and for this time.
Yes, really, truly, thank you so much, because it's not often that we get to talk to people who do such a deep dive into this.
Well, we're honored to do it, and we'll keep doing it, and we will keep picking your brains as long as you let us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. You can pick it till there's nothing left. That's fine with me.
Oh, man. Cool.
Oh.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Our pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
Yes.
Next time. Man, oh man. we talked with those guys for so long.
We did.
It was such a good time.
It felt like we were truly just hanging out with friends. Like,
Yeah.
I could have talked to them all night, and we really almost did. But
We really over 5 hours. I
oh
mean,
my God, it was so fun.
it was after midnight for them. I think it was like 12:30 or 1
thank you.
in New York.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jody.
Thank you,
You gave
guys.
us so much of your time.
Yeah. You guys were so
I mean,
gracious.
we couldn't appreciate it anymore.
Well worth a Friday night spent with
Yes.
some living legends.
Yes, definitely.
And spent with you guys.
For sure.
Thank you for listening to our 50th episode. Thanks for being here and making all this possible.
It's still so wild to me.
If we didn't have all the support, I think we would have wanted to keep going with everything.
Yeah.
But this is a lot of work.
It would be harder
to just like,
if we didn't have the support. So yeah, just every little message, every email just means the world. And speaking of, you can follow us on our socials.
Yeah.
If you would like to interact with us or see, what's coming up, we post, about new episodes when they're dropping and, all that fun stuff on our social media.
You can see Kaylin's face all the time.
Yeah, unfortunately.
The reels. She does all the fun TikTok things.
I try
that
really hard to
everybody
do the TikToks and the reels so
loves.
that you guys can share them with your friends, and it makes it more fun to share these memories that we all have. So
Yeah. And that's Pretty Dark podcast.
that's right. That's Pretty Dark podcast.
Really
Or
anywhere.
just That's Pretty Dark on TikTok,
Or, right.
where I messed it up.
Oh, and also, if you guys want some more content than 50 episodes, you greedy jerks, you can join our Patreon. You can give us $5 a month or any amount that you want to give. And we just posted our first mini episode that was also a video.
Yeah, we've posted a couple like little chats here and there, but this is our first like episode that we took from, a vignette from another episode, a conversation that we wanted to have, and decided to just record it for our patrons. And
Yep.
yeah, the video thing is intimidating, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, you can watch me hesitate and second guess everything that I'm doing. Just watch my face. Just watch
Same,
my face.
though.
Think through, oh shit, the camera's on.
Yeah.
You have to keep talking.
Yeah, isn't that wild? It's
Yeah,
so different,
it's fun.
but it's
so fun. So
If you've ever wondered what we look like and
fun.
you haven't seen us before, we are available for your eyes as well as your ears on our Patreon.
ladies, we keep our shirts on.
Ladies.
Yeah, that's patreon.com/TPD podcast. Go check that out if you want to support us and help us keep doing this thing that we love to do to you every other week.
You sounded like such a radio personality right there. I really liked it.
Yeah, well, if we had an actual sign off,
We wouldn't have to do it.
we could, we would be more radio. But who needs a sign off?
Who needs
I'd
it,
rather
really?
stay signed on with you guys, you darklings.
Don't you guys like it that we struggle to close every episode? Isn't that way more fun 50 times in a row?
The closest thing I have right now is don't trust strangers and don't burn books, because banning books is fascism. So
Yeah, don't do that.
support education, support reading and learning.
Support the writers of the media that we
speaking of,
love so much.
the strike is good, everybody. If you're wondering, if you don't really know what's going on,
Imagine a world where we didn't have writers getting everything from point A to point B.
Yeah.
None of the streaming services would make any money.
Yeah.
None of the networks and TV would make any money. None of them ever would have. Everything begins with the writers. And honestly, it's a really perfect time for us to have just been able to have these conversations with David and Jody, because it further illustrates that conveyor belt can't start unless you have writers, unless you have a script, unless you have a story. And that's the whole,
it's true.
It's
not writer greed, it's the company greed
Yeah.
that doesn't want to pay the writers.
the corporate greed is the enemy
corporate
here.
greed.
And we really want to, Christian and I both feel that artists should be compensated for their work, because their art is just as important as everything else, if not more so, especially to us. So
Absolutely. Yeah, if you want to see some fun pictures of everything that's going on in New York, you can go to David's Instagram.
if you're-
And he's been posting because he's on the front lines
he's
down
on the
there.
front lines of this picket line.
It's super
so.
fun. His mask got picked up by
The New York Times.
The New York Times,
Yeah.
His a photo of him.
As it should.
Yeah, super fun stuff.
As it should.
Yeah, guys. Until next time. Until we get back to our regularly scheduled programming. Thanks for listening.
With just the two of us next time.
Yeah, just us.
You guys are probably really going to miss David and Jody.
Back to normal.
We'll be glad to be with the Darklings once again.
Just us two and all of you. Man, we're so good at rhyming. It's always like two or you.
Every time.
Ew.
Ew.
Ew. Ew. Thanks for listening to That's Pretty Dark. Written and produced by Christian Baxter Mott and Kaylin Andrews.
Our music is composed by Jonathan Simmons, and our art is provided by Paige Garland at Power Girl Illustration.
Join the collective nostalgia and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at That's Pretty Dark Podcast.
Share your experiences and let us know what shows, films, or villains still haunt you from childhood at that'sprettydarkpodcast@gmail.com. Remember, you're never really alone.
So, until next time, sweet dreams, everyone.